What a complicated sandwich we are piling together when we try to design races and factions. There's so many things that we need to consider if we want this idea to come out fully baked. There's considerations of lore and background, story and culture that all contribute to a unified or harmonious look. And then from there, you don't want them to be so harmonious that they all look alike. So it's like you're trying to clone your child. Let's outline a sustainable process and some best practices, as well as give a few tips on how to do this. Remember that instead of just being aimless drawing, design is always done to fill a purpose. And another way to say that is that it solves a problem. Now, when it comes to designing a race or faction, this has two different meanings. For your story or your premise, what is the purpose or point of this group? But for the race or faction themselves, the problems that they are solving is a great way to figure out what they're like. For example, the problem that the Fremen of Arrakis deal with in Dune is a lack of water on a parched desert planet. So they've built still suits, enclosures for their bodies, hooked up to their nostrils that recycle every bit of moisture that they might expend. Every bit. Gross. So that's their visual design. Their culture is defined by and almost obsessed with not losing water, even calling the act of shedding tears when someone dies giving water to the dead. And of course, they hold out hope that the planet they live on can be more sustainable and even green again. So there's a ton more nuance that can be gotten from there, but already we have a whole branching path off of their situation, culture, ideals, designs, and more. And that's not even getting into the wider range of the story of Dune, like the effects of the spice melange. This is one of the great things that we get to do when we make sci-fi or fantasy scenarios. It's that there's so much that can be heightened and wielded to make a point and an impression. Where do they live? What conflict do they deal with? And how does that inform them? Now, since all characters are inherently human, since we as humans are the ones making them, so often there's a contrast and a message in place. What makes this group or species different from humans or from people from a certain planet or region? What makes them more admirable than us? Or what flaw do they have that tells us something about the darker side of humanity? So here's some questions to ask yourself about the story and premise of your race or faction before we get into the visuals, since all of this will strengthen your visual ideas. Is this race or faction more noble and enlightened than humans here on Earth, or perhaps more animalistic and primal? Are they even sentient? What is the key difference between their lives and ours? What is the biggest challenge that this group faces? What do they hope for the most? What is this race or faction's largest philosophical flaw, blind spot, or thing that they need to learn? So now that that's out of the way, let's make a bunch of cool costumes and armors and vehicles. So visual signifiers are all going to stem from what you know about this group, right? Whether they're already human and you're designing the way that they dress, or they're not human and you're designing their biology, or a little bit of both. Two huge helps with this are color and shape, and we can break both of these things down a little bit further. Shape language is something that we've talked about in depth in the past and in the Learn Character Design course. Shapes imply things about characters. Chunky, blocky shapes might imply a brutish or stalwart group. Long, curly shapes might imply an elegant or enlightened group. Sharp, angular shapes might imply a ruthless group, and so on. Just some examples, not rules that it must mean those things. You can take those shapes and imply plenty of other ideas. Now, we can apply this either to the actual design of the people or the designs that the people themselves make. And that's what makes this such a layered process. You're getting into the mind of the people you've made and using their hands or tentacles or whatever to make designs of their own. A lot of people worry though that they'll make the group that they've designed too similar or uniform, and this is where symbols and shape motifs can be so helpful. Here you can create individualistic designs and then conform towards a center. Here's an image from an old show called Buzz Lightyear of Star Command, and no, I'm not kidding, because as silly as this is, each of these characters is completely different. Two are aliens and one is a robot, but they all use either a standard uniform, which has recognizable shapes and colors, or the symbology of Star Command, which is the faction that they belong to. Now let's get more nuance then, since you rejected my last example on site. StarCraft is a game series that is largely defined by three separate factions. The Terran, which are basically just Earth humans in space, the Zerg, the primal hive mind bug aliens, and the Protoss, the enlightened noble aliens. Now, from a functional standpoint, it helps for a player of the game to be able to differentiate units apart from each other, but to also be able to tell what faction they belong to. So the Terrans use lots of rectangular shapes. They have panels and rivets. Their aesthetic combines construction equipment and space travel equipment and the NFL robot mascot. Every unit that you see is plausibly piloted by a human, whether it's a little race car or a little mech suit or a really big boy mech suit. The Zerg are completely organic and grotesque, so their buildings are organic. They have insectoid features. I think the Baneling is something of the epitome of the Zerg design, a large, glowing, rolling sack and a bunch of insectoid legs. They are overseen by queens and defend their hives with acid and venom. Gross. The Protoss use advanced technology beyond our comprehension to warp their units and buildings in. There's an element of organic design to their units, since they do share a predecessor with the Zerg, but it errs on the side of elegant and mysterious rather than grotesque. You'll notice lots of long teardrop shapes, golden panels, and glowing blue lights, along with their elevated beings that radiate a sort of blue electricity. Even the names of units help provide that feel. So the Terran's base is called a command center, the Protoss's base is called a nexus, and the Zerg's is called a lair or hive. Really, the kinds of units available in these games are wide and varied, but applying the design language of one of these races immediately identifies them and appropriates them. We can develop a design language starting with a simple shape, kind of like a logo or pattern. Applying this across our existing designs might be enough to identify them with your group, or at least work as a starting point for more iteration. Adding a predominant color or range of hues to these characters does the same thing. We don't need them all to be the same people. The characters can be individuals who disagree and think apart from each other. We just need to be able to show that they come from the same place. All of us on Earth here are different, yet if we use clothing that comes from a particular culture, or even a particular decade, it becomes easy to place that people. I think this is a really interesting process, because again, you're not just drawing with your hands, you're using a little marionette's hand to draw for you on a certain level, to get into the mind of the characters, to then make the things for themselves. I think the biggest balance to strike as well is just how different the people are in this group from each other. Do they have a literal hive mind sharing the same thoughts, or are they more individualistic? I also think there's a lot of fun to be had designing multiple factions, because it gives you that chance to contrast and make opposites between them. And then as soon as you have more than two factions, it becomes about creating variety that's more than just opposites. So this is something I haven't really done before, but I want to actually give you an exercise or prompt, because I think it will really sell the idea that we're talking about with color, shape, and feel. And this is doubled down on because Burger King just released some cool new branding. I want you to take one or more different logos from companies, or I think it would be especially silly to do like fast food branding, to create a faction like a tribe, an army, or spacefarers or something, more elevated than just their usual uniforms. So what is the McDonald's armor going to look like versus the Chipotle or Starbucks armor? How do those shapes and ideas and colors evoke something about the brand that is now a bunch of pirates or aliens? Because a lot of times these are logos and branding that have a lot of thought about perception and meaning put into them. It doesn't mean simply slapping the literal logo onto the character either, like Superman's S. It's about using them to inform the overall design. You don't have to choose fast food, you can choose something local to where you live as well, but I want to see what you come up with. Tag me at BagelDenizen on Instagram or Twitter if you do, and I'd love to see. This month's Bego's backpack looks like this. You can get it over on patreon.com/BagelDenizen, as well as personalized video critiques of your work. My course, Learn Character Design, is a comprehensive character design curriculum over at learncharacterddesign.com, and of course you can follow me on Instagram, Twitter, Twitch, and TikTok, all at BagelDenizen. There's more videos like this every week here on Character Design Forge. Thank you so much for watching, and have fun creating. I made it through this whole video without mentioning Star Wars, and I'm oddly proud of myself for doing that, but let's set things straight. All right, so the reason that Grand Admiral Thrawn is such an